AV Shop Talk, Episode 4.
Podcasting from Boston, Massachusetts and Los Angeles, California, this is AV Shop Talk. Covering the latest audiovisual trends and emerging technologies, this is where the AV pros come to talk shop. With your hosts, Nate Schneider and Jason Griffin.
Welcome to the AV Shop Talk podcast. I'm Jason Griffin in Los Angeles, and as usual, I'm joined by Nate out in Boston. Nate, how are you?
I'm doing very well, Jason.
Great. Everything's going well out there in Boston?
Oh yeah, things are going well. We're very busy as usual. You know, with InfoComm right around the corner. I'm really excited for that. I get to be out at InfoComm in Las Vegas for the first time. So definitely super excited to be out there and to see what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always a fun time leading up to the trade shows, as well as obviously being at the trade shows. But even leading up is always a fun time because there's always a lot of energy and conversation going on Twitter and the other social media channels about InfoComm. And unfortunately, I will not be able to make it out this year, regrettably. But yeah, go out there, have a good time in my name, and enjoy it. It should be a great show as usual.
I will look for a free drink to have on your behalf.
Very good.
But you know what? I think you've got some other news that might outshine InfoComm if that's possible. So
I certainly hope it outshines InfoComm. Absolutely.
Why don't you share what's going on with you?
Yeah, so my wife and I are actually expecting our first child here. She's due in mid-November, so we're extremely excited about that. And everything is looking great. We're super happy about it. So I kind of put the word out on Twitter the other day, and some people may have seen that. But yeah, we're just now getting to the point where we're kind of, announcing it and letting our friends. Family has known for quite a while, but just now letting friends know and all that. So it's a very, very exciting time.
That's so great. I'm so happy for you. Having one daughter right now who's about 2 years old, and then our next child is on the way, actually September. So I'm just so excited for you to be going through that. And
well, thank you. Yeah, like I said, we're super excited. So it's a great time.
Awesome. Well, we will have similar birthdays too, because I have a mid-November birthday as well. So
oh, do you? Very nice.
Be interesting to see how close to November 21st.
Yeah. It sounds like it's going to be a busy holiday season for both of us.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we should probably let our listeners know what we're going to be talking about this episode.
Yes, definitely. So we were actually honored to have a couple of the gentlemen from Kordz, Kordz, come on and join us. And Kordz, for people who may not know, is a manufacturer of HDMI cables, actually based in Australia. And really, they pride themselves on making very high quality, very reliable HDMI equipment, or cables rather. So we had them on to talk all things HDMI, and we had David Meyer, who is the founder and managing director of Kordz, as well as Michael Schaller, who is based here in San Francisco, and he's the director of U.S. operations. And so he joined us from San Francisco, and David joined us all the way from Australia, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, I was really glad we got to do an interview with those guys, and they were just very, very gracious guests. And we ran into a little bit of technical difficulties. And oh, I'm running into some more technical difficulties right now. That's not supposed to be playing in the background. We really appreciate them taking the time to jump on a Skype call from Australia and Northern California there. Really cool thing about these guys is they actually carry around the HDMI 2.0 spec, like in their laptops or on their iPads. So they really know HDMI inside and out.
Yeah, and they talk a lot about that. Well, at least a little bit about that in the interview, about sort of their theory and motto as a company, or sort of their MO is to really understand the specification of HDMI and really adhere to it. And they're actually one of the few companies out there making HDMI cables that they're actually an HDMI, an official adopter of the specifications. So that's a real, I think, differentiator for them. we talked a little bit about kind of the race to the bottom with HDMI cables and how they're just getting cheaper and cheaper. And really, it's kind of unfortunate because what's happening is that a lot of integrators are essentially subsidizing the price sensitivity of our clients. And David talked about that, which I thought was really interesting because we're giving them these cheap HDMI cables up front to try to get the costs of our systems down. And then in turn, we're getting all of these reliability issues that we're having to eat basically out of our pockets.
Yeah, and it's those service calls when you do a home theater in a super yacht and they're out in like the middle of the Pacific Ocean and they've got a service call because their HDMI cable's broken or it's not managing EDID properly and you've got to send a guy out to their super yacht. That I guess that's an actual situation that can potentially happen for service calls for some of these high-end customers. So holy cow, give a longitude and latitude and
that was a crazy story. And it really shines a light on the importance of reliability, but even in the more, I guess, quote unquote real world that most of us operate in, it's still hugely important. I mean, TVs and video displays are one of the technologies that our clients interact with the most, and when that doesn't work, clients are very quick to pick up the phone and call you and complain and make you come out there and fix it, and who can blame them, right? Mm-hmm. But so I think the idea is just that really it's important to understand HDMI, and of course Kordz is stressing that it's really important to use the highest quality HDMI cables that you can, which of course they believe that they make, and it sounds like they've got a great thing going on. Yeah,
definitely. All right, well, I think we've summarized or kind of given our listeners a little taste of what's to come. So let's why don't we just jump right into the interview?
Sounds good.
AV Shop Talk.
We are joined tonight by a couple of gentlemen from Kordz, and we're happy to have you guys on. We're joined by David Meyer and Michael Schaller from Kordz. How are you guys doing tonight, David?
Very well. Thanks, Jason.
Very good. Thanks for joining us. And David is joining us all the way from Australia, so we do appreciate that. And Michael up in Northern California, how are you?
Good, Jason and Nate. We're doing awesome up here, man.
All right, very good. Well, we're here tonight to talk all things HDMI. And as usual, I'm joined by my co-host, Nate. Nate, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well. I'm really looking forward to this interview and kind of hearing what the Kordz guys have and, for their perspective on HDMI, since this is kind of the world that they live in and that they breathe in. And, oh, man, as 4K is in its infancy and is developing, I'm sure these guys can give us some great perspective on kind of where 4K is and how that fits into the mix with HDMI 2.0. So definitely looking forward to chatting a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think before we jump into some of the more technical aspects and talk more about HDMI and that sort of thing, maybe, David, if you can just give us a brief introduction of yourself and what you do for the company, and then we'll go to Michael.
Yeah, certainly. So I started Kordz 11 years ago now, which has just happened to be the same year that HDMI was defined, although I hadn't actually heard of it at that stage. The business principle from the beginning that still stands to this day is all about just bringing integrity to the table when it comes to interconnects, which I always identified as being perhaps the simplest, most economical way of achieving an upgrade to a system. As it's evolved with HDMI, that's not just gone from upgrade, that's actually gone to achieving stability in a system, wherein the HDMI cable can actually represent in excess of 95% of a signal path in an entire system. So that really has grown to our specialty. So we're an HDMI adopter, HDMI 2 adopter. I'm a CEDIA certified instructor and subject matter expert on both 4K and HDMI, and actually write and present courses for CEDIA internationally on those topics as well.
Great. Yeah, and I know that the fact that you guys are an actual HDMI adopter is somewhat unique to your company, and we'll touch on that a little bit later, but I'm glad you mentioned that. So I'll give Michael just a brief moment here to introduce himself, and then we'll jump into the meat and potatoes here of the episode.
Thanks, Jason. I've been with Kordz since January of 2009. Before that, I was actually working at HDMI licensing, where I was the first person in charge ever of HDMI compliance. So what attracted me to Kordz was not only David, but believe it or not, we really have good products. Being in the compliance end of the business at HDMI, I was able to see all the junk that was out there. And David and Kordz bring a fresh perspective and a real importance to the interconnect world, and that's what really attracted me to it. And so far, being the director of U.S. operations here since 2009, we've really made a lot of headway in the principles that David founded the company on, which is education, compliance, and really the engineering around and the understanding of HDMI and where it fits in the big picture.
Awesome. So yeah, you guys, as a company, Kordz is really geared towards obviously HDMI, but as an integrator working in this industry, I understand that we face a ton of problems and a ton of challenges with HDMI on a daily basis. And I think Kordz has a unique approach to that. And if you guys, David, maybe you can talk a little bit about how Kordz, sort of the business model and how you guys see the landscape of HDMI and how you think your company is maybe uniquely positioned to help integrators face maybe a few less headaches with HDMI in general.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been many times where I've fronted a class of eager installers wanting to learn all the voodoo behind HDMI. And a common question that I ask is, who's ever had problems with HDMI? And invariably, all hands go up. We follow up with the question, who knows what those problems are? And typically there's zero response. So it is a bit of a plug and pray system, unfortunately. So what we're about, and the fact that we focus on HDMI connectivity means that we actually do have to focus on what it is that actually causes failures in HDMI systems and actually produce products that actually engineer those deficiencies out. Because we're all about just, specifically the custom install community is our primary market. We're not mass market, we're not general consumer. You can't go into any major retailer and buy our product. We're all about making product that enables an installer to get the job done faster, reduce troubleshooting time, just get the job done and get paid and get out. So, and I guess most importantly, alleviating the dreaded phone call days later from somebody saying the system now doesn't work, and you end up having to go back on non-billable time to fix it up. 3 weeks ago, I was in Canada and spoke to an integrator there who had spent a whopping 12 hours of troubleshooting on a single job. This was across 4 separate visits back to site post-general install. So the entire thing was non-billable. There was even a free upgrade to an AV receiver in the system in the mix as well. So it was a very, very costly job for them, and there's no way they made money on it. So we're about alleviating that.
Yeah, so the whole plug and pray thing doesn't really sit well with me, coming from being involved in commercial AV for the past since like 2007, and now working in the medical field doing more integrated operating rooms for the past year. So people don't have to do this plug and pray mentality, or they don't get stuck in that trap. What are like the biggest problems that you see occurring with HDMI? Like, are there maybe 1 or 2 things that you notice like right off the bat that this is a huge red flag, or this is a huge red flag? What are the most common mistakes that you see, or specific mistakes you see happening with HDMI today?
Well, from the mechanical aspect, go ahead, Dave.
Yes. Sorry, I was actually just going to point initially to facts within the industry rather than our own observations, and that is that the number one cause of interoperability issues in the world of HDMI has to do with the EDID, the packet of information that's being sent from the display back to the source with identifiers about compatibility, video timings and the like. And the number 2 cause of interoperability issues globally, and this is recognised fact, is in fact HDMI cables. But because cables carry the EDID information, they actually contribute significantly to the number one as well. So they're actually a much, much bigger problem than people realize, and that is because a cable is a mechanism for loss. All cables are mechanisms for loss. There's no such thing as a cable that does it better. It either does it right or it doesn't. So the best cable is one that actually screws it up the least, if you like.
Right. So it sounds like what you're saying is even if you had a foolproof cable that would work every time, you'd still have an EDID. You still could potentially have EDID problems messing up your system, but more often than not, it goes a level further, where you've got a bad cable to begin with, A, and then B, your EDID is all screwed up on top of that. So it's kind of a moving target for troubleshooting. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yeah, installers are not in the business of making HDMI cables. They just want to use them. So we don't have expectations of anybody knowing how to differentiate good cable from bad. That's our job. So we just expect people to rely on us to get that bit right. And I carry a copy of the HDMI specification around on my iPad. I mean, we reference it all the time. We make cables to it. I know that it's actually a surprisingly unique attribute. But keep in mind that an HDMI system, and we're dealing with complex systems, you can use a cheap, nasty cable and still get picture and sound if you're going directly from source to sink. But as soon as we've got complex systems with AV receivers, with splitters, there's matrix switches, there's wall plates and joiners and all sorts of things going on, and extenders with Cat-X cable. So there's a whole lot of hops that the signal has to make, and losses are cumulative. So we can end up, if there's loss value in every cable used, then and every connection used, then it's actually the sum total of losses from one end to the other that determines whether it's going to work or not. Whereas every piece in the system may on its own be perfectly fine. There's nothing faulty. It's just that the sum total of the whole lot together is bad. So using good cables is critical in keeping that total sum of loss as low as possible.
Yeah, and I think go ahead, Michael.
Here's a kind of an interesting formula. It's a real high-level one, but in order to have a good viewing experience, you're going to need a good source, a good sink, and a good interconnect. Anytime that you cheapen any one of them, all three are affected. And that's the HDMI world. And when it comes to HDMI cabling, since about 2007, it seems that most people have been racing to zero, wanting to get that real low-cost solution, and not really taking into fact that 10.2 gigabits of data are zipping through that cable. So, the engineering behind an HDMI cable really should be looked at instead of that of just as a low-cost alternative. And that's kind of our approach. I mean, if you look in the HDMI specification, as David already told you, we carry it around in our laptops, and nowhere in the HDMI specification does it say that you need a loose, sloppy connector. I mean, just for an example. So,
yeah, that is true.
There's a lot of things that, believe it or not, where the interconnect comes into play, and the little differences in whether or not you use solid core type of connectors, whether or not the connector fits into the socket correctly, whether or not you can make the bend radius small so you can fit in small places and stuff like that. All that stuff, guys, adds up to a potential for disaster when it comes to hooking up HDMI.
Yeah, and I think that's, as an integrator, that's the most maddening thing about HDMI is that it's, like David was talking about, it's this combination of performance signatures, and this was discussed quite extensively in HDMI Uncensored, which I recommend is a great read, I think, for anybody in this business. It's one of these things that's impossibly difficult to describe to a client. And from a client's perspective, they spend a lot of money on these systems. They hire a professional, they move into their house, or they, start working in their office, or, whatever solution you've deployed for them, they expect it to work. And the problem with HDMI is that it either works great or it doesn't. And it's not always consistent, and you don't really know what combination of products is going to work and what isn't. So I do agree that I think it's critical to look at everything in your signal chain and, ensure that you're using quality components. So what are you guys doing specifically as a company to, we've talked generally about HDMI, but specifically what's different in the Kordz manufacturing process? And maybe you guys can touch on some of the things that make, like if I have a Kordz HDMI interconnect and a brand X right next to each other, like what are the differences between those two in terms of the manufacturing and quality of those cables?
I'll start this off and then pass it over to David by just saying
Sure.
at Kordz, we take pride in making sure that the interconnect is the last thing you actually have to worry about. We engineer everything specifically so that it really is not plug and pray, but plug and play. So with that, I'll let David go into it because he's our product manager guru, and he can give you all the specifics on all the little things that add up to make our interconnect something that, again, you're not going to have to worry about.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that saddens me most with when I speak to installers around the world is hearing that they're effectively subsidizing the price sensitivity of their clients. So by trying to use cheap cables because they get too much, and keep in mind that cheap versus expensive, by the way, is all relative. We're not the most expensive by any stretch, but we do cost more than a lot of so-called cheap cables. But what I'm seeing is this price sensitivity and therefore using cheap cables, inviting in trouble and interoperability challenges for themselves, because ultimately it's the installer that tends to be making the decisions about the connectivity used, not their client. So if they end up saving $50, $60, $70 on cables and then spending 2 hours in troubleshooting, just getting a call to say that there is a problem with the system and having to go back to site to check it out only to find that it was a cable at fault, a connector that's come loose, for example, which is a common one. You can be halfway to site before it's now deemed uneconomical. You buy a cheap 30-foot cable and pull it through the wall to find it doesn't work, then that cheap cable has suddenly become an extremely expensive cable. So what we do, to answer your question about what we do differently, is recognizing, I mentioned that every cable is a mechanism for loss. We have to recognize where those losses occur, and over the length of cable is actually not necessarily the greatest loss. It's actually in the connectors themselves. So there's great popularity now with locking connectors. I recently wrote a white paper on the topic, actually referencing the HDMI specification, again, for a change, and and suggesting that the locking connector is, how did I word it? It was an unnecessary solution to an erroneous problem.
Yep.
So it's one of those things where the connectors are made cheaply, they're made badly, and this is almost ubiquitous across the market. They're badly made. Just by engineering a bespoke lock to make sure it stays in the socket, I then asked, does that make it a good cable overall? Do you know what the contact pressure is in the actual pins themselves? Do you know what the actual termination methodology that's being used? Imagine taking a Cadex cable and soldering an RJ45 connector onto it and expecting it to actually work at 100 megahertz or 200 megahertz of bandwidth. With 4K, we're talking 1.5 gigahertz of bandwidth in real time. We're talking 9 billion bits a second that we're expecting to actually deliver in real time. No buffering. So it's a big challenge. So all I ask for is a little bit of respect for the cable. And there's multiple. I could talk all day about what it is that we do in engineering, but I won't bore you with the specifics.
No, thanks for the input there. And I mean, HDMI, you've got 19 little pieces of copper shoved in there. It's no surprise that it's not easy to manufacture a good connector with the right tolerances. But before we get too far into 4K. I was wondering if David or Michael, you guys could speak about, what are the big differences with HDMI 2.0 compared to previous iterations of the spec? Like, what if there are like one or two big differences that our listeners to this podcast could take away? What do you think they are?
Well, Nate, I believe you would have read the articles that I wrote recently on this very topic, and the main differences are really going to 4K 60. So it's all about frame rate. There's really nothing added in terms of 3D, etc. And there are many people that actually think that 4K is kind of the next big thing after 3D, but it's a completely different thing. So the headline act is actually going to 4K 60 frame. It's about eventually increasing data rates from the current 9 gigabit per second aggregate throughput, which is a 10.2 high speed rating, up to 18 gigabits per second. Now, keep in mind that 1080p, what we've been using for all these years now, is only 4.5 gigabits per second. So suddenly talking about going to 18 is actually a pretty big leap. Yeah. So any challenges that are there with HDMI now, imagine what's going to happen in that landscape in future.
Yeah, and there's not many people that are advertising, full 4K solutions. I mean, there's a few, manufacturers out there that are saying, use us from end to end to support your 4K, but the consumer world, I think, is hearing, like, the marketing machine has been turned on. I think 2014 for sure is the year you can put down on your calendar where 4K is starting to, really come onto the scene. But, for the most part, it's just the displays that are being advertised, not as Michael said earlier, a good source, a good sync, a good interconnect. It's really just the sync that's being displayed at this point.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, well, that's actually how it was in the early days of 1080p as well. We all regard 1080p as normal and actually relatively unexciting now, but think back to around 2006, 2007 when the HD DVD Blu-ray war was on. That was the birth of real native 1080p content. Prior to that, all we had was scaling DVD players, which were actually just upscaling from 4:3 ratio 480i. So we're at that similar level of infancy now, except that the uptake will be, and the growth curve will actually be much, much faster than it was for 1080p. So the other important thing, actually, before I forget, it is very, very important for us to note when talking about HDMI 2 that there is no such thing as an HDMI 2 cable. Just in case anybody listening is actually wondering whether we make HDMI 2 cables, the answer is no. The main reason, why do we not make them and others do? Well, that's because we understand the specification and we're honest, because there is actually no such thing.
All right, so we've touched a little bit on HDMI 2.0 and 4K, and they're exciting technologies, especially the 4K technology. I think I work in high-end residential, and a lot of my clients seem very excited about 4K. I mean, I'm having clients ask me unsolicited about 4K, and that didn't really seem to happen with 3D. That was a technology that didn't. It was kind of like a solution looking for a problem, sort of. I felt like, but 4K seems like it's the real deal. I think we all know that it's coming.
Yeah.
And it's making its way to the new normal. I think. So I'd just be curious to hear you guys talk about what you're doing to prepare for 4K, and it may not be a direct tie-in, but I know the Neo S3 active HDMI is a big push for you guys, and maybe you can talk about how that ties in with the increased bandwidth requirements that we're looking at with 4K.
Again, I often get asked questions in the courses that I ran. I often get asked questions about 3D and 4K where people do make the comparisons, because both were announced with the HDMI 1.4 specification back in 2009. So they were both announced to market at the same time, and 3D obviously was the one that took off first. So if anyone was to ask, do I need 3D? The answer is no. 3D is it's an optional addition. It's an enhancement to some content, but it's certainly not a necessary thing. With 4K, it's very, very different. The same as we had that necessary upgrade for performance from standard definition through to high definition, and ultimately to full HD at 1080p. And I don't need to talk about the benefits of that. Everybody's experienced that. What's, however, happened over the years is that we've been slowly robbed of resolution, because when 1080p first made its big debut several years ago, TVs were, the ubiquitous size back then was 42 inches, and now that's kind of regarded as a bedroom size. So TVs have got bigger and bigger, and the resolution hasn't changed, which means the size of pixels has been getting gradually larger. Apple have taught us that with the Retina display, they've taught everybody about visual acuity and just how much resolution the human eye is capable of resolving. With TVs getting larger and larger, but viewing distances not changing, we've ended up effectively getting what is, in real terms, lower resolution because pixels are getting larger. So it is time with that evolution to sort of step up the resolution and with 84 inches of 4K at the same viewing distance, all we're doing is getting back to the same pixel pitch that we had with a 42-inch 1080p TV. So it is a necessary step.
Yeah, and it's getting closer and closer to what the human eye can actually differentiate from too. I mean, at a certain point, you won't be able to perceive any more detail. And I'm not an expert exactly. I know there's been some great white papers written by some other AV professionals, but I'm not a complete expert on that. But I know that 4K is rapidly getting to that point where the human eye won't be able to tell the difference. So pixel pitch and viewing distance are huge factors that usually often aren't discussed too much because people usually resolve to bigger is better, right? And just get the biggest possible. So
yeah, that actually brings us to the challenge of back to connectivity again. If the biggest benefit with 4K comes with large screen, particularly with projectors, one thing that every projector installation has in common is a long cable. Mm-hmm. So our experience has told us, and we are HD-based Alliance members as well, mind you, but we've still found that the best fighting chance for HDMI to work its best is to in fact just use HDMI from tip to tip. Now, if it's a challenge to put in a long cable because they're big, thick and heavy and typically only work to 1080p, then what's the solution for 4K? And that is, with our product, the EOS 3 that Jason mentioned before, is something that we've been spending a long time in developing and engineering to resolve just that problem.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share and mentioning about the EOS 3 there, and I know distance is a big thing with HDMI because that's one of the huge factors. So having a solution like that can go long distances, I think is really important. Just wanted to thank you guys, Michael and David, for taking the time out of your day. I know it's a holiday over there in Australia, so. Thank you very much for jumping on in. And what holiday is it again, by the way? You want to share with the viewers, give them some education on Australia real quick?
Yeah, it's Anzac Day, which is the just recognition for the dedication of our fighting forces for both Australia and New Zealand. So the ANZ being Australia and New Zealand Army Corps. So it really is. It's paying tribute to those that have fought in wars throughout our history.
Oh, that's great. So it's similar to Memorial Day or Veterans Day in the United States, it sounds like.
Absolutely. Spot on. Yep.
That's awesome. Well, we wish you a happy holiday. And Jason, if you have anything else to add.
Michael and David, thank you both for joining us again for the interview. We really appreciate it. And it was great to learn a little bit about HDMI and 4K and where all this technology is going. And we enjoyed the conversation. So thanks again.
Oh, thanks for the opportunity, guys.
All right, guys. Take care. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
All right. Well, that will wrap things up for this episode of AV Shop Talk. We really appreciate all our listeners there. So if you are still listening to this podcast right now, you are appreciated. Definitely check us out on Twitter at AV Shop Talk or check out the website. But hopefully you found that information informative and helpful and useful. And I think that's what Jason and I are really going for by creating this podcast, is just trying to reach out to subject matter experts and just get their input on some of these new trends and emerging technologies.
Yes, absolutely. And David and Michael were great guys to have come on just to do exactly that. They obviously really know what they're talking about when it comes to HDMI. David is a CEDIA certified instructor on the subject matter of HDMI. So it was really great to hear him kind of talk about the technology, some of the pitfalls behind it, some of the things you can look out for as an integrator. And we all know it's kind of a dark art. It can be very frustrating at times. So I think anything that you can take away, anything that you can learn about HDMI that's going to help you, put yourself in a better position, I think is definitely worth the time.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, David has been published in The Connected Home back in July 2013. He wrote an article called "What the 4K," and he's got some really good perspective on that, and you can really tell he knows his stuff when you get into HDMI 2.0 and you're talking 4K and bandwidth. So very knowledgeable.
Yeah, and David has some great writing on HDMI, and we're hoping to have some of that information included in the show notes for this episode, which of course are going to be at avshoptalk.com. People can come by, check that out, leave us a comment, also sign up for the email list there. And of course, if people are enjoying this particular episode or the podcast in general, we would absolutely love if they could stop by on iTunes and leave us a 5-star review. We're trying to build an audience with the show, and if people find it useful, informative, entertaining, any of that, we would definitely appreciate a review.
Yeah, I guess that's all the rage with podcasting is getting that review in iTunes. So it doesn't cost you anything, and we really appreciate it if you enjoy these episodes and you want to hear more. Definitely swing on by to iTunes or the website, and I'll be looking for people at InfoComm this year too. So keep an eye out for me on the exhibit floor.
Yeah, definitely. Have a great time out there at the show, Nate. And I look forward to speaking with you again after you get back.
Definitely. I'll be doing some live tweeting at the AV Shop Talk Twitter account too to let you know what's going on and keep you up to date with maybe some new technology that's being unveiled.
Great. Well, I will be watching from afar.
All right. Thanks for listening. And stay tuned for the next episode. This podcast is produced independently by Jason and myself. Voiceover talent was provided by John Perry. Musical contributions coming from Colin Owens.
AV Shop Talk.